Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. It is July 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. So if it's that time for you right now, then we are live, which means we're taking your comments and your questions. So if you have a comment or question for any of us today, please put it in the chat, and we'll be getting to those by the end of our show. So we have a very exciting show today. So I want to get into it and introduce you to our guests. So first we have our Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, Avram Pilch. Hello, Avram.
Hey, glad to be here and really excited to be on the first episode of the show where you are taking over as host. You're going to make the show 10 times more awesome.
Yes, I'm hoping at least 10 times.
At a minimum.
So Avram, what have you been up to the past week since we last saw you?
Projects with a lot of things with my son and for Raspberry Pi stuff, which I know we talk about mainly on our Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern show, the PiCast. But I'm showing here one of the Raspberry Pi cases that I've built because I'm testing them all out for a roundup on our site. And this one is kind of cool. It is going to break while I'm showing it to you, but it is an NES style case made out of Lego-like blocks. They're not official Legos, but they're Lego compatible blocks, 307 pieces. You put it together and your Raspberry Pi is in here. And then you can use it to play retro games. I mean, you don't need the case to play retro games. You don't need this piece on that just came off while I was showing to you, but it makes it like a lot cooler. So as soon as I put this in, my son said, you got to put some emulators on here, so it's running RetroPie emulation.
So have you played any games on it yet?
Oh yes, he's played a few. He's played a few games that I won't go into, but he's played some Nintendo on here.
Nice. I'll have to challenge him later. So we also have today the king of chips, shall I say, but also our deputy managing editor at Tom's Hardware, Paul Alcorn. What's going on, Paul?
Oh, nothing much. Just been busy testing chips, as one would imagine. We have some pretty exciting stuff coming up. AMD had some recent releases that are OEM only that are not coming to the retail market, but that doesn't stop us. So we already have Renoir in the lab, and we're testing on that now. And also, we've been working on a big showdown between AMD's EPYC processors and Intel's Cascade Lake Refresh. So if you're into server stuff, and big 64-core, 128 core systems with 3 terabytes of memory, then we got you, because we're doing a lot of testing on that. So it's been pretty busy, to say the least.
Nice. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. But in terms of what's going on right now, there's a lot been going on in Paul's CPU world for sure. A lot of news around Intel, not great news, but news. Can you catch us up on that a little bit, Paul? What's going on with Intel, and when am I getting some 7 nanometer chips?
Well, you're going to have to wait till 2022, the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023 in order to get 7 nanometer, which by Intel's timeline means probably the middle of 2023, because they never, they're getting a reputation of not hitting their timelines. So 2023 would probably be the earliest that we're going to see any Intel 7 nanometer. Now that's 6 months behind their original projections, but it's actually pretty devastating to their entire roadmap. Now, Intel does have some options on things that they can do in order to remain competitive. And of course, the biggest option, and the one that has sent shockwaves through the chip world this week, is they announced that they're going to use outside foundries. So they're actually going to have somebody else punch out some Intel chips for them, possibly. It's kind of like if Ford said, well, we're going to have Chevy make our pickup trucks. It's pretty shocking that Intel is resorting to that.
So is that the first time Intel has ever done that?
Okay, so no. Intel has a lot of scale. Intel punches out nearly 1 million chips per day. Compared to somebody like AMD, their output in 3 months is about what Intel does in a day. So with Intel's scale and the number of chips that they make, they've had to outsource for a long time. As a matter of fact, they've been outsourcing for over 20 years. And they outsource roughly 20% of their production. Now, we've covered this and had talks with Intel about this in the past when they went back to 22 nanometer from 14 and have done some different things. So they've confirmed that. Now, the difference is in the past, Intel has only had outside chip fabs, primarily TSMC, only make small chips like chipsets and low margin things that aren't necessarily into compute. They're protected IP, they're core series, they're CPUs. They've never had anybody make those. They keep those to themselves because it's high margin, it's very complex. There's a lot of proprietary IP that they don't want anybody to know their secrets. So them making a change to where there is the possibility that TSMC could fabricate their chips, that's a huge change. And Intel hasn't announced exactly which products they're going to have, aside from one made by an outside vendor. One of them is Ponte Vecchio, which I can never say correctly, but it's their first GPU. So they're going to have an outside vendor use 7 nanometer. It has to be TSMC. There's no other option to make portions of that. Now it's a chiplet-based device, so they got a bunch of little like Lego blocks that they plug in together to make this big, this big fire-breathing GPU. So some of those chiplets they will have to outsource, and they have announced that. So that's not good news for Intel.
Yeah, so Avram, we've talked about this before, the need for Intel and vendors also like AMD, CPU vendors, to be innovating and coming out with new products yearly, or else basically the PC industry gets stagnant. We don't see new releases and things like that. So just curious, how do you see this affecting the greater PC industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, I do have to wonder if they're going to be doing, what. Obviously, I think they're going to have to release things or do some releases in the interim to try to give PC vendors a launch pad to come out with new products. It's also another opportunity for AMD, right? AMD now, maybe companies will be more inspired to come out with product that features AMD chips, and AMD will launch, and they'll launch along with what AMD is doing. So yeah, I mean, Intel is going to have to do something. It just isn't going to be something that's 7 nanometers.
Yeah, when you look at Intel's track record with 10 nanometer, they were on 10 nanometer 5-7 years. I'm losing count. Or excuse me, they were on 14 nanometer for that long. So I'm losing count of how long they went to 10. It took them to get to 10, and they're really not even entirely there yet. And that kind of shook the industry's faith in Intel. You look, Apple switched away from Intel, and this is before they messed up 7 nanometer. And there's a lot of other developments beyond just Apple, where over the years people have lost a lot of confidence in Intel's ability to execute. And being late on 7 nanometer, from that perspective, is nothing short of disastrous for Intel. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. In the eyes of OEMs who demand consistent cadence of products that are competitive and that they can build designs around, I mean, they're investing money in these designs. So when they're late, it costs them money. This second series of what will probably be a long string of delays is, it's very, very detrimental to Intel. It's probably hard to put into words how bad it's going to hurt them in terms of other people considering AMD. Now, AMD historically has had a bit of a bad reputation for being a poor supplier, especially in the pre-Zen days. They weren't on schedule either. Now, ever since Ryzen has come, AMD's big message has been boring execution. They want to execute on each new step down to smaller chips or more advanced nodes and architectures, and release new chips on such a steady cadence with so little drama that they call it boring execution. And they've delivered on that. And the tides have shifted. So confidence in AMD is running very high. I mean, they are firing on all cylinders. they have yet to mess up. So
And
good
so,
times for AMD, no doubt about it.
well, so is there also, Paul? There's an investigation going on with this, right? A securities fraud investigation. Is that correct?
Correct. So now so a law firm. As a matter of fact, now there are several. We wrote an article about the first one, but I've been reading reports of other ones over the last few days. We're going to need to do a roundup at the rate that they're.
Best fraud investigation.
There was one lady who spent $300,000 in stock, in Intel stock, the day before it dropped 16%, and she's suing and starting a class action lawsuit through another law firm. But the primary law firm, the first one that got involved, is also asking for whistleblowers to come forward for SEC violations for fraud, because if Intel knew about the 7 nanometer problems months ago and did not let their investors know, that can be a real problem. I mean, it's fraudulent because Intel stock lost 16% of its value overnight, and it's probably down now closer to 18 to 19%. We're talking billions of dollars. They shed $53 billion worth of value in about 12 hours. That's almost the size of AMD, is how much money they lost. So
well, Avram, if you were in charge of Intel, do you have any tips for how they'd get out of this? What would you do?
Heads would roll. Heads would roll. I would figure out who's responsible, and I would make a change. I would make a change of leadership. I would remove them from the socket. I would take the thermal paste off, remove them from the socket, and find an upgrade, because obviously there's a lot of problems here. But the other thing that I would do, I would underpromise. I would try to set up I would make sure that there's a roadmap of kind of under promising, right? Like, hey, maybe I'm going to tell you 7 nanometers is going to come out a little later than it is. I'm going to make sure that I don't promise something that I can't deliver on.
It's like when you tell the kids it's going to be a small holiday this year, but then you get them the bike anyway.
So Intel did take some pretty swift action in order to calm down the investors, and they got rid of Murthy Rindinchunatala. His last name is a mouthful. Now, they brought him in and paid him big money. They paid him an $8.1 million signing bonus 5 years ago, which is unheard of in the chip industry. And I mean, a signing bonus like that. But anyway, they brought him in to lead their manufacturing efforts when they were having problems with 10 nanometer. It was his job to fix it. That was his remit. Now, he eventually assumed a lot of control of a lot of different parts of Intel, and they rolled 5 different divisions in underneath them, all of their manufacturing and technology and design and architectures and everything, and they created this super group. So Bob Swan, of course, somebody had to pay. Murthy was the one. He got fired, and they disbanded that group essentially. And now all of those groups, they report directly into Bob Swan. So yeah, they're restructuring the whole company as a response to this and to the amount of value that they've lost. Now, like Abram says, that's kind of like taking the CPU out of the socket, but I think the pins are bent in the socket. I think the socket is broken. I think that the fix for this is going to take a lot more than that. There's a lot of people questioning the decisions of putting a CFO in front of, as the head of one of the most technologically advanced companies on the planet, not having an engineer in there. So I think that they have some institutional problems that aren't yet fully addressed. We'll see.
Okay. I want to bring up our first question because it actually ties nicely into our next topic, which is, what do you guys think AMD needs to do to capitalize on Intel's missteps?
Well, from my perspective, it's simple. Execute, execute, execute. Don't miss a beat. It really doesn't matter right now. People want predictability. That's where the money's at. And they need to continue to work on making money, and of course, in the data center. And they need to expand their penetration into OEM systems. So when you look at And this explains why they didn't release Renoir and Threadripper Pro into the retail market, is because the OEMs, when people go to a big box store and they just buy a pre-built PC, that's 60% of the market, right? They've been missing out on that part of the market. Intel has owned it because AMD hasn't really penetrated that segment as well. Now they're starting to they're making massive gains in the enthusiast market, but that's not the bulk of the market. So they're releasing, in a very smart move, they're releasing chips only for the OEM market that are compelling, right? Maybe even arguably better than some of the things that are available to people, as standalone products. And that's creating some incentive. I think if they can improve that, they'll be good, and just keep executing.
Design wins. They need design. They need design wins. But it's never been clear to me why they are in fewer designs. I mean, well, I think there's a few reasons why, right? I don't think that there's one. So, like, is the reason that they're? I mean, if you go and you look for a laptop today, whether it's a gaming laptop or an Ultrabook, although Ultrabook's technically an Intel word, but a portable laptop, you go and you look around, and 90% of them are Intel powered. And when we talk to laptop vendors, a lot of them were very gun shy about using AMD, and I tend to think part of it is that they don't want to damage the relationship with Intel, and that's a little bit disturbing. And part of it has been, AMD has had a somewhat lesser reputation on mobile in terms of power consumption, but that's gotten a lot better. And the real question is, what can AMD do to convince companies to come out with some real flagship designs that have AMD in them, not just cheap stuff or a way of shaving a little bit off of the price of a gaming laptop? Like, we've seen gaming laptops where, to shave a little bit off the price, they went with AMD instead of Intel, but they give you a crappy screen and a crappy keyboard or something like that. They don't give you top of the line. I would like to see AMD do something to kind of twist the arm of a vendor like an Alienware or ASUS. I mean, ASUS has actually used a bunch of AMD stuff, like in the Zephyrus, which we really like. But, like, how about getting into, like, their top performers? I'd like to see AMD really going after that business. I don't know whether the problem is the vendors don't want it, AMD's not giving them a good enough deal, or they just can't deliver enough volume.
I agree on those points, and I think there are a few others, and they mostly have to deal with money. To be honest, AMD is a much smaller company than Intel. I mean, the scale is way different. I mean, it is very much smaller. So they don't have the engineering resources that Intel does, not by a long shot, probably a tenth if they're lucky. So when Intel works with OEMs and stuff to create these systems, there's a lot of hand-holding and direct help to those companies on the engineering side. They're investing a lot of money into making these designs, and they need to be optimized heavily in order for them to compete against their competitors. So Intel is there for that type of technical support. With AMD, that has been a bit of a slow haul. You hear that a lot from various people, is that their technical support isn't near where Intel's is. Now that's improving as AMD grows in scale. Another part of it is the MDF, which is Intel's manufacturing fund. Now, a lot of people call it a slush fund, but it's a multi-billion-dollar fund where Intel spends money on advertising its partners' products. So, let's just say, for instance, X company. We won't call anybody out here, but I mean, almost all of them use some form of MDF. If X company creates a laptop, well, Intel will pay a certain percentage of their advertising for their product based upon certain deliverables, and who knows? The details of these agreements aren't necessarily public, but we do know it exists and it is real. So, there is a financial reason for them continuing to stick with Intel. And of course, again, predictability. They're investing money. AMD hasn't been predictable, but it's a whole different ballgame now. I mean, the AMD still may not be able to compete on the MDF side of things yet, but in time that will happen. But on the engineering side and the execution side, absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about AMD, because they just shared their Q2 earnings report, and the numbers are kind of wild, right? So some of the things that stand out there are record laptop sales, highest consumer or record revenue, record laptop sales, highest consumer CPU sales in 12 years. So what's the biggest takeaway from that?
AMD is doing well in most of the segments that matter, especially as we're coming out of COVID. A lot of companies, almost everybody's seeing some type of disruption. They're navigating that well. Record revenue, they're making money hand over fist right now. And they're selling a lot more chips now. They did sell the highest number of client chips in 12 years, but there's a caveat to that. Their Ryzen sales were down, but their notebook sales were through the roof, and that's where they need to grow, because that's, like I said, that's the big segment.
I have a question about that. Is it the number is actually big, or is their growth big?
The number is actually big.
Okay.
And it's growth. They look at year over year, quarter over quarter. I mean, they're steadily gaining share there, and it's an extremely important part of the market now. Intel. So AMD doesn't say how much they lost in Ryzen sales, or not necessarily lost, but how much it was down over the prior quarter. But I will tell you this: Intel, buried in their financial stuff, their desktop PC sales for chips, desktop PC chips, were down 15% last quarter, which is huge. AMD is kind of went unnoticed in all of the. I didn't even notice till like 2 days later. In all of the hubbub around the 7-nanometer, nobody noticed Intel's desktop PC chip sales are plummeting. I mean, down 15% in a quarter is big. So, I mean, AMD is definitely taking share. But, AMD is doing well in everything that they do right now, mostly.
So we have another question. Oh, I guess that's not a question, huh? Sorry. We do actually have another question. Sorry, I'm trying to bring it up. It's about ARM chips. And here we go. x86 versus ARM. Is x86 really losing?
Shouldn't the devil know?
Yes, the devil should know. He's the devil.
The name of the viewer is Devil.
I mean,
I don't think so. I don't think x86 is losing, period. So, because Apple switched to ARM, Apple likes to control their ecosystem. Apple wants more profit. Apple wants to maintain their walled garden. Apple has always been about a closed ecosystem. Intel and AMD and x86 is a broad ecosystem that goes beyond Apple. Granted, ARM goes beyond Apple, but Apple makes their own chips. So yeah, this is about money for them. Their stuff, I think they're going to have a problem scaling up to the speeds that people want on a MacBook Pro to do serious work. Good luck to them. I mean, it could happen. But ARM is better at low power and is not quite as good at scaling up to what people need. And then you've got to wonder about the software, the best software working on ARM. So I really don't think that x86 is losing. I think Apple has made a decision. And I think what we saw in the marketplace over the last several years is that x86 and ARM have to coexist. You will not see x86 in a phone or a tablet. I mean, we did see it in some tablets, but we saw it didn't work out.
We wish we didn't.
Well. I mean, I guess that the Surface counts, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there was a time, my wife still has one, when you could get like an 8-inch Windows tablet with an Atom processor in it, and we don't see that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take a look at x86 versus ARM, first thing that you have to do is you have to separate it into, like you pointed out, mobile, and take that off the table. And then, when you look at the desktop side of things, the problem is application support. It's going to be years before we get all, they get all of that sorted out on ARM. And then, when you look at the data center, that's a whole other ball of wax too. You see impressive benchmarks and stuff like that, but when you start looking, it's media state. When you start looking into the actual performance metrics and how they're measuring them, it's very lopsided competition. And when it comes to cost, there's a huge difference. I mean, it really depends upon which segment you're talking about. With, a data center, they're like 0.03 or 0.3% of the data center market, for servers. That it's a long, hard slog. You want 3 to 5 years at the least before. And everybody that's developing chips in that segment are kind of doing the same thing. Like Apple, it's a walled garden. They're developing their own proprietary chips. They want to keep it locked down. So that immediately limits penetration. Then on the desktop side, like desktop PCs, I don't see anybody rocking it. ARM desktop PC. I mean, maybe on the Apple side here shortly. I'm really curious how they're going to replace Xeon with ARM. That will be interesting. Not saying it can't be done, but that's a long, hard slog. Apple gives the effort a little bit of momentum, but I will say I've been hearing ARM is going to take over for 10 years.
Windows on ARM is terrible.
This time it's different. Every time, every single year, this time it's different. This time it's different. This time it's different. I've yet to see it be different, I mean, materially different. There are advantages to ARM, absolutely. But the big problem is software.
Windows on ARM is garbage. Windows on ARM is terrible. We've had, I think we recently had Andrew on this show where he was showing off, was it the Lenovo Flex 5G that has Windows on ARM on it? And it's like, what is it, like the third or fourth generation of Windows on ARM laptop that uses Qualcomm chips. Like half the stuff doesn't run. Things run through emulation and they're slow. There's a lot of stuff that hasn't been ported to work on ARM yet. And then on top of all that, to add insult to injury, it's more expensive than buying one with x86. So you're having the kind of performance you get from a $500 phone and a $1,400 laptop. So yeah, Windows on ARM is garbage, and that doesn't really, to me, bode well for ARM on the desktop.
I'd like to, just as a general observation, sometimes when you want to determine if something's really a threat, what you should do is look at the competing companies and what they're doing. Now, AMD and ARM have AMD and Intel have the biggest ban hammer in the world right now for x86 emulation. They can lodge some pretty convincing lawsuits because when they're emulating it, they are using x86. It would cost a lot of money in order for them to sue these massive companies like Qualcomm, Apple, et cetera. And it'll be a long court fight. And they have decided that apparently that it's not enough of a threat for them to actually spend that money yet. They're not that concerned. Intel issued a 2-year, when Qualcomm did its emulation thing, issued a sternly worded, letter about a letter to the public, basically threatening legal action. There's no other way to read it, but it apparently isn't enough of a threat for them to do it. But their legal team are the ones who wrote that. They know they have a case. So I think when you know that ARM is real, in terms of, especially in terms of emulation, is when you see them start getting sued by the people who hold the x86 patents or licenses, excuse me. When they feel scared, then maybe it's something.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for sending in questions. Please keep the questions coming. I want to share with you guys a little surprise that I promised you, because I do not lie. So, send in your questions. In the meantime, I'll be getting this little surprise ready for you guys, which is Razer's new headset. Let me make this a little more visible for you all. This is Razer's new headset announced today. It is the Black Shark V2. And if you want to see our in-depth coverage of it, you can head to tomshardware.com right now. And the review is right up there on the top. So this is interesting in that Razer's been doing this a lot lately. They've been kind of not just putting out new products, but putting out new tech with it as well. So a couple weeks ago, they released a new keyboard with upgraded optical switches. So here they're trying something new again. They're introducing new drivers called Triforce Titanium drivers. I feel like you need a strong voice when you say that. And basically it tunes the low, mid, and high frequencies in different ports, whereas other drivers do it all within the same area. So it's supposed to, have clearer voices, more crisp trebles, more powerful bass, things like that. And obviously things I cannot demonstrate to you on a video, but what I can do is demonstrate the mic that they also just introduced. It's a cardioid mic that they're dubbing hyper clear. This is their first headset to use it. So what I thought I'd do while we wait for more questions to come in is I've been actually using Razer as one of their USB mics, the Sirene X, I think, because they have the long E sound, the line over the vowels. I guess it's Sirene X. So I'm going to switch from this USB mic to the headset mic, and you guys tell me if my voice is still great to listen to, or if you hate it, or what. And in the meantime, guys, don't forget to send in your questions because we're going to get to those right after this. So here's a question. Is the mic detachable? Yes, it is. That was an easy one. Keep them coming. So in the meantime, so I'm going to switch this up and you guys tell me how it sounds. All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
How do I sound? Better, worse?
To me, not as good.
Not as good? What do you think, Paul? Do you like my voice?
Not as good. And your other mic, when you held it to the side, your voice level went down quite a bit. So it's not omnidirectional. But yeah, the other one's better. Sorry, Razer. Your toasters are better. All right. Go for the toaster.
I hate to say it, and maybe it's just how it's hooked up, but it's probably how it is. It sounds sort of like when you hear somebody reporting about traffic from a helicopter.
And we also have Jared voting worse. Well, to be fair, this is a USB mic. It's, geared exactly for things like this. But yeah, if you want to hear more about the actual audio quality, the review is there. But these are actually the same price. This is $100. The USB mic is also $100 right now. And we got another vote from John Reed. My voice is not as good. I'm sorry, guys. I hope you still like the sound of it, though, a little bit.
Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it's a driver issue.
It's not your voice. It's the
The one thing I will say is I did a recording with the mic and then also this, and it did block out background noise a little bit better. I had some TV going on and it did not pick up the background noise. So that is one plus. So thank you guys. Now I know I'll rely on the USB mic going forward, else we'll lose all our listeners. So we have some questions coming in. First from John Miller. When can we expect Zen 3 desktop processors? Sounds like something Paul would know.
AMD has been cagey. They've been saying Zen 3 is coming out this year. They've been saying it all year, but they didn't say what or where. They didn't say if it was. We already knew the server products were on the roadmap with Zen 3, but about 2 weeks ago, we actually broke the story that they said the word client. So in the land of microprocessors, client is the consumer business. You have client and you have server. So they've said client, which means there are Zen 3 chips coming to the consumer market. Now, whether or not those Zen 3 chips are going to be in laptops or they're going to be on the desktop is the question. And, how much volume they're going to have this year, if it's going to be on shelves, we're going to have a paper launch, does it come the last day of the year, kind of like Intel trying to meet its timeline? We're not sure yet. It could go either way. It could be laptop or it could be or it could be desktop. I think desktop. I hope. I mean, it's pretty exciting.
So you have work to do, right?
I'm not looking forward to that part, but
I'm looking forward to the people reading about it on our site. But my guess is going to be later than sooner. My guess is maybe you see limited release toward the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking the same. You know, it's strange that they're you know, the APUs. It's not strange. There's a lot of reasons why, but they didn't release the desktop APUs to the market. They have been promising to have one coming though, but they're not saying they. Okay, when they released it to OEM, they told us, you know, it's only going to OEM, but tell your readers, don't be like, or tell people, you know, don't worry, we've got something coming, a next gen APU coming to the retail market. And they say next gen APU, but they don't say what. Like, they're not saying it's Renoir. They're saying next gen. So I think they might sneak out an APU, because when you look at APU, they kill two birds with one stone. That's that same die and design is used for both laptop and desktop. So you may get both. That's my prediction.
And so we have another question from Benjamin, and will RISC-V, is that how people normally say that? I'm a writer, and I shouldn't be allowed to
Yes,
speak.
it is. It is risky here.
So will RISC-V compete with ARM and x86? Any thoughts there?
Yes, especially with ARM being up for sale. You know, RISC-V is open source everything. It's wonderful. It's a new paradigm. ARM charges licensing fees. Now, there have been reports over the last about a month that ARM has quadrupled the licensing for a lot of their key licensees, and some of them leaked that information to the media because they are not happy. And you know, that's not good. Now, ARM is up for sale. SoftBank, the people who own them, are selling them. It looks like NVIDIA, NVIDIA is interested, according to reports. Makes a lot of sense for NVIDIA to be interested too. So, you know, if NVIDIA buys ARM, I mean, what are people going to think? And, you know, the people who build ARM chips, that's a threat to ARM. And then in addition, you have another problem with ARM. They're having a lot of problems over in China. They started a China office. They created an ARM China. And like, it's been in the news for the last week or two, there's basically a defection going on over there. And they're kind of doing their own thing over there in ARM China against the wishes of the parent company. I mean, if you send your tech over to China, that usually doesn't turn out well. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot of disruption in the ARM space. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risks. And people who, you know, count their money in B's for billions don't like that. I think we will see more traction with RISC-V over the coming years, yes.
Until it appears on a Raspberry Pi, I don't take it seriously.
It's Pi or nothing. So we have another question from a single Brad. Which upcoming Intel server products are comparable to AMD EPYC Rome and EPYC Milan? And how is Intel still able to maintain near monopoly on the server market?
Okay. So this is not an easy question to answer. We don't know what's going to be competitive with EPYC Rome because, you know, Intel's chips that it has on the market right now are not competitive against EPYC Rome in a lot of things. I mean, they do have a few areas where they're good, but they're limited where they're better. But you know, when it comes to Milan, it's just going to depend upon how fast it is. I think it's going to be really good. And then Intel's going to be fighting them with 10 nanometer Ice Lake, which comes this year. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm trying to get this Cascade Lake refresh and EPYC Rome testing done. The high frequency models is because I know Ice Lake's coming this year. You know, Ice Lake's going to bring some important things like PCIe 4.0 that really hurts Intel in the data center not having it. So that's good for them. How is Intel able to maintain near monopoly? So people always consider the price of the chips, and they say, man, you know, AMD's chips are a lot cheaper than Intel's. And, you know, why aren't they just buying them? Well, when you look at the cost of software for these big hyperscalers and data centers, you know, some of these data centers are 11 acres square, and they have over 1 million servers. The scale there, the price of the server chips means nothing to them. When they create their code, they optimize it for the chip and the architecture that it runs on. And it takes like a year to get it validated. It goes through all of these validations. Whatever they deploy into this massive fire-breathing data center that's generating trillions in revenue, they want to make sure it is as bulletproof as humanly possible. And that costs a lot of money. And they don't do that if it's only going to work for one generation of chips. So if they think Intel's suddenly going to become better than AMD the next time, they don't want to change all their code because that's really a one-time expense. They design it for AMD, and bam, each time AMD releases new chips, that code still works. Bam, bam, bam. Right? Now, if the market goes through AMD is good now, and then and they switch all their code over and spend all that money and spend all that time, and then Intel's better. Well, look, see, they buy roadmaps. They want to have confidence in AMD holding the lead. Nobody has had confidence until approximately last week when Bob Swan said 7 nanometer was delayed. So I think that Intel is going to hold that advantage for quite some time, or not quite some time. They've held that advantage for quite some time, and I don't think that advantage is there anymore. People are going to start investing in AMD. The tides are going to change.
This is great. We're getting a lot of questions in, and I'm very happy about that. So we have another one from Thomas Pop. Could Milan, that's again AMD EPYC, could Milan be 5 times superscalar?
I don't know. There a lot of the exists. That's a big jump. I don't want to make many predictions. Now, if you look on our website, there was this video that was posted where they weren't supposed to post it, and it showed some details of Milan, and we caught it before they took the video down. Nobody else did. Hallelujah. Anyway, if you Google it, you can find it. But we're looking at the main change being they're unifying the L3 cache in the CCXs, and instead of basically having 2 4-core clusters, you got 1 8-core monolithic with the shared L3. That's going to give them a lot of benefits. That's about all we know. I can't make that prediction beyond that.
Because we have you on video, and when you're wrong, I'm going to pull this video up, right?
Yeah, I hate being wrong.
Well, great. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give a shout out to NVIDIA Quadro because they wanted one. So, if you're still here, NVIDIA Quadro, thank you for tuning in. So we're about at the end of the show. Does anyone have any final words? Paul, Avram, any other insights to share?
I'm just really excited. Just stay tuned. I'm very excited, not only for what's going on with AMD and Intel, but what's going on this show. Now that Sharon has taken the reins, she's already doing a fantastic job. This is already probably the best episode that we've had, especially in terms of participation. So I'm very excited.
Awesome. Well, yeah, as Avram said, we'll be here next week again, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. And if you can't join us at that time, we have our replays on YouTube, Facebook, and audio format. We're a podcast too, so you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast on. So thank you guys all for joining us. We'll be here again next Thursday, and it's great chatting.